So we wanted to get started today by talking a little bit about women in myth, the maiden, the mother, and myth through storytelling. Why is it so essential for women, especially, to get reacquainted with the feminine through metaphor? And so to get us started today, I just want to read a little excerpt from The Heroine's Journey by Maureen Murdoch, which, if you know me, you know that this is my favorite book. And Maureen says, if a woman has not been initiated into a feminine mythology by her mother or grandmother, she has to develop her own relationship with her inner feminine to the Great Mother. So, technically our mothers and grandmothers and elders used to take us into the red tent and sit around the fire and get us acquainted with symbolism and mythology and storytelling. And that is just not what we do in society today. So we are left on our own accord, if we ever get there, to kind of figure out what the language of the feminine is through myth. This may explain why so many women today seek ancient images of powerful feminine deities and heroines to heal the wound within, because female history has so been shattered, and women are reaching back to prehistory to find elements of the woman's mythology that existed before the Greek division of power into multiple gods. And we can clearly see this division of power into multiple gods through the aging of myths. Persephone is a great example of this, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, where there's two stories of the myth of Persephone. One where she goes to the underworld on her own accord, and another where she is sanctioned by the masculine, by Zeus, her father, who represents the father, the culture, the father of the culture father. The patriarchy, and her father summons her down to the underworld, where she becomes captive by the god of the underworld, Hades, and she has to escape. And both versions of the myth are good. Both, we can take a lot away from both versions of the myth, but also just to say, we used to see much more feminine empowerment through myth. And as the rise of institutionalized religion and the suppression of the feminine began occurring, we can actually see the suppression of the power of the feminine occurring through the myths as well. So we'll save that piece for a bit later. But for now, where I really want to start is just kind of understanding the archetypal stories of myth and fairy tale and Disney movies and pretty much any film that you watch has a hero or a heroine, and there's this archetypal journey that the characters go through in order for us to kind of understand them better, their story, their life. It's the story arc, right? So I really love to study two things. In my own history, I went through a year-long program on Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. Joseph Campbell, wrote The Hero's Journey, and it is still known as that archetypal story arc of life. We see it in all the movies. And I'm going to talk a lot about Maureen Murdoch. And Maureen Murdoch was an understudy of Joseph Campbell. And this is the fascinating part, because Maureen Murdoch went to Joseph and she said, "Hey, Joseph, do we need to rewrite the hero's journey for the heroine, for women, for the feminine representation of the story?" And Joseph said, "No, we don't." And, it sounds a little misogynistic, but really what his point was that the feminine is the end of the hero's journey, right? Once the hero becomes the elixir, he is in higher consciousness, a feminine consciousness. Feminine consciousness can also be seen as unity consciousness. Why? Well, because the last moment that we felt in union as one was in the body of a woman, right? So in the body of the feminine were we one with the mother, okay? So Joseph said, no, we don't need to write the story arc for women because feminine consciousness is the end of the hero's journey. he didn't use the term feminine consciousness. He said the feminine is the end of the hero's journey. Great. The feminine is the end of the hero's journey. But me as a woman in the patriarchal society that we live in today, I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm totally wrapped up in, at that time, I was totally wrapped up in my hero's journey. I was on the journey of the masculine, right? Like, so in my studies, the conclusion that I have come to is that we all go on the hero's journey, but we also all go on the heroine's journey, man and woman alike. These are energetic story arcs, and if we're so lucky, we get to go on both. I like to think of my hero's journey as the first aspect of my life, where my underdeveloped masculine suppressed the underdeveloped qualities of my feminine, and then in saying no to that outward expression, hero's journey of life, I began to call forth more developed qualities of my feminine that then pulled my developed masculine forward. So let's talk about the story arcs. What are they? What's the difference between the hero and the heroine's journey? I think it's really simply put. The hero's journey is the outward expression of life. We see it in all of the myths, right? It's the hero that gets a call to adventure, and he leaves the home. He leaves the tribe. He meets with mentors outside of himself. He has teachers outside of himself. He finds his enemies and his allies right outside of himself, right? They're all people that he encounters while on his call to adventure. He has tests, he meets with allies, he finds his enemies, he goes through ordeals, right? We go through ordeals in life. We go through having children, raising children, we find partnership, we have friends, right? We try to find the job, we get fired from the job, you know, we move, we have geographical changes, all of these being outward expressions of life. And that is the hero's journey through these ordeals. And at the end of the hero's journey, he returns with the elixir. And this is really, I think, kind of a key point of the difference between the hero and heroine's journey. The hero returns with the elixir, and he says, here is the medicine, and he gives it to his tribe. Whereas when we become the heroine, we put down the doingness of the heroics, and we become the heroine of ourselves, right? So we are no longer finding the elixir, we are the elixir at the end of the heroine's journey. So just a couple things to think about. Again, story arc of the hero, call to adventure, meets with mentors, test allies, enemies, ordeals, road back home, comes home with the elixir, everything outside of himself, right? And that really is the outward expression of life. And it's very important that we go through the hero's journey. Why? Because we cultivate healthy masculine qualities. We learn how to, number one, individuate. We learn how to differentiate. We learn separateness, basically, in order to understand ourselves more, because we are relational beings, and we do have to understand how to relate to the world, to understand how we're different from the world, in order to understand how we're special within the world. So it's almost like we differentiate in order to find out how to fit in with the relationships around us, with the relationships to the outside world. Okay, the heroine's journey is a little bit different, and I love the heroine's journey so much. I mean, obviously I talk about it like a beating the dead horse, but what are some stages in the heroine's journey? Well, right off the bat, we see that the heroine's journey really starts at birth, okay? So it's interesting because the hero's journey starts when we're called to adventure. However, the heroine's journey really starts with key stage in life, and I think that we continue to face this stage in life throughout our entire life. It is separation from the mother. As soon as we are born, we separate from that feminine consciousness, and the heroine's journey is all about coming back to that feminine consciousness, with the closing the loop on that story. So we separate from the mother. What happens after separation from the mother? Naturally, the hero's journey, the identification with the masculine. So, through separation from the mother, we actually look to the person that is most like us in order to understand how we different from the feminine that is most like us. So we find ways to pick apart the mother so that we can say, I want to be different, I want to be different, I want to be different, ultimately under the question, who am I? Who am I? And I mean, that's the question between the hero and the heroine. Who am I? So we separate from the mother, we identify with the masculine, we learn how to fit in with the masculine society. We cultivate our masculine attributes in life. And in the identification with the masculine, two questions surface. We either learn how to be like men, or we learn to be liked by men. Okay, so that's really the journey with identification of the masculine. It's how do I cultivate the qualities that allow me to fit in, be like men, or alternately be liked by men with the masculine overtone of all of society, patriarchal society. We face a road of trials, but as the hero faces the ordeals and the road of trials, right, the heroine's trials are really facing the ogress within, right? This is where we start getting into the two-headed dragon, which is really the inner dialogue of the adversary voice that suppresses our feminine. We learn through identification with the masculine that how to succeed in the masculine life, right? So how to develop qualities that are goal-oriented, direction-oriented, separation from the mother, identification with the father, with the masculine, with society. We go through a road of trials. We are literally meeting the ogress within, the two-headed dragon, the adversarial narrative. We go through our illusory boon of success. What does that mean? We are the superwoman mystic, the great pretender, the myth of perfection. All of these live within that illusory boon of success, right? I went to school, I got the accolades, I got the job, I got the salary, maybe I bought the home and I did all the things that told me that outward expression of success is when I would get happy. And here I am with that outward expression of success, all of those things that I was told that I should do in life, and have the children and get the husband, and now I'm getting a divorce. And in my own story, I went through the illusory boon of success, and what I found after getting all the things outside of myself was I was completely miserable. And this is a really it was all an illusion. And this is really a key factor in when we realize that does not merit, outer success does not merit inner success, right? Our outer landscape does not define or qualify happiness within our inner landscape. When we can see that it was just an illusion, that it was the societal terms of success, when we can see that and we realize we're not happy, and we awaken to the spiritual aridity of all of that God is not outside me, but that God is inside me, that God is not outside of me, but that the goddess wants to rise within me. That is really when we start going into an initiation, into the descent to the goddess, into what was it all for? It wasn't true. And I need to really find out who I am outside of what society told me I should be. And this is the heroine's journey. The hero leaves the cave and goes on a journey outside himself. And the heroine re-enters that cave, and it's the cave of her body. And she goes on a deep dive, a descent within, to find out who she really is, to recollect all of the feminine parts that were suppressed and repressed, and we became depressed, to collect all those parts, to bring them back out to light, to say that my emotional body, my intuition, my discernment, all of the feminine qualities, you begin to become attuned and in tune with the feminine that lives in the body versus the masculine that lives in the intellect of the hero's journey. We dive into the descent into the body to recollect all those feminine parts. For what? To become whole once again, to become fully integrated once again. And in order to do the descent within, in order to really come back into the cave of our bodies and find out who we are, what happens? We have to divorce the cultural narrative. We have to leave the collective conscious. We have to leave the patriarchal programming that told us who we ought to be in order to find out who we really are. And I love the story. It's a Grimm's fairy tale of Allerley Rowe. And Allerley Rowe did just this. She left the father's house. Metaphorically, we can look at the patriarchalized society as the father's house, right? The institutionalized religion, institutionalized education, institutionalized everything that actually works to suppress and keep small. Our greatest power lives in awakening the feminine within. So Allerley Rowe, Grimm's fairy tale. I want to tell you this story because it's really the best example that I have of what I went through when I decided to leave the father's house, right? Quit the corporate job, get rid of the 6-figure salary, sell the big, beautiful home, all the things that were supposed to make me happy that didn't. And it's a journey of being lost. It's a journey of being lost without a paddle because society doesn't teach us about how to leave this society, right? Society wants you to kind of like stay attuned with the man so you can keep paying the man, and you know how it goes, right? So let's talk about Allerley Rowe. The tale goes a little bit like this. Once there was a king, and this king had a beautiful queen with blonde hair, and she was the perfectionism of what a queen should be. The people loved her. And you can think about this right here. She was perfectionism of what a woman should be. Well, immediately it's like, according to who, right? The external beauty, where did that come from to say that blonde hair, the blue eyes, the pretty, pleasing, and polite, right? Who's to say that that is the perfect feminine? It's the male gaze. It's misogyny. The king has the perfect wife, and they have a daughter, and her daughter's name is Allerley Rowe. So the story goes, the queen became sick. She became deathly ill. And on her deathbed, she told the king, "You have to promise me when I die that you will not marry anyone as beautiful as I. You cannot marry anyone other than anyone that is beautiful as I." And the king agreed, and then the queen died. And what did the queen do in that promise? The queen not only kept herself under the helms of the male gaze, misogyny, the male lens, this myth of perfectionism, this illusion of what the feminine should be, but in that, she also held captive her king, her husband. He promised, he said, "I will never marry anyone unless they meet the standards of what society says the perfect woman is." And what he did in this promise was he set himself up for failure. And this is exactly what media and the hypersexualization and the media narrative does for men too, right? They tell these little boys that this is what the perfect woman should be. And then what happens is men get tied into the narrative of the perfect woman, and there's a ton of great women around him, and he's caught in the illusion as well. No wonder he can't find a wife. He is trying to search for a wife based on what society tells him a wife should be. Once upon a time, there was a king. He had the perfect wife. She became deathly ill. She made him promise, "You can never marry anyone unless they're as beautiful as me." And he said, okay, and she died. So the king grieved and grieved and grieved, and he couldn't seem to come out of his grief. And eventually the kingdom, the people, wanted the king to marry another wife. They wanted the divine union within their kingdom, right? The king to marry another queen. And so the king goes and he sends his soldiers, he sends his men out into the community, into the land, looking for this perfect wife, and they just can't find her. And one day, as the daughter, Allerley Rowe, she starts to grow and mature, and years go by, and her hair is beautifully blonde, and she looks just like her mom. And the king finally looks at her and he says, "Oh my God, you are the perfect depiction of your mother, and I will marry you." An incestuous society. I will marry you. And the daughter, Allerly Rowe, she's, oh my God, you're not going to marry me. So she makes her dad promise. She challenges her dad. She says, Dad, I will not marry you until you find me 3 dresses and a coat of 1,000 furs. And that's ultimately what Allerly Rowe means. It means 1,000 furs. She makes her father promise her, or challenges her father. He has to make her 3 dresses and a coat of 1,000 furs. One dress is going to be golden like the sun. The next dress is going to be white, silky like the moon. And the third dress will be just glitter, starry like the universe. And what does that represent? Well, that sun represents the masculine. The silky white is the moon of the feminine. And the third starry dress is the universal oneness of both the sun and the moon, which is the brilliance of the stars, right? That unity consciousness. And then she also says, I need a coat of 1,000 furs. You have to kill 1 animal in your village. You have 1,000 animals in your village, and I need a coat that has a patch of each one of the animals on this coat. It's a coat of 1,000 furs, which really represents the primal self, the primal self. And so Allerly Rowe thinks that her father will not be able to achieve this task, and he does. The king is able to achieve the task. He finds the best seamstress. He makes the 3 dresses. He gets his huntsmen to hunt the animals. They make the coat of the 1,000 furs. He achieves the tasks, and he says to Allerly Rowe, and now you will marry me. And so the next day, they're set to be wed. And so the night before they're supposed to be wed, what does Allerly Rowe do? She packs up her 3 dresses, puts them in a little tiny acorn, and puts on the coat of 1,000 furs, and she runs away. She runs away from the father. She runs away from the incestuous narrative, the misogynistic male lens that intuitively just doesn't feel right for her. And she leaves the ordinary world on her hero's adventure, and she enters the enchanted forest of the woods to truly find herself. She doesn't know what's going to happen. And I'll tell you what, I quit my job and sold my house and said, no, I'm not doing it anymore to the patriarchal narrative. It was scary. And I left being the burning tower. I left being the princess in the burning tower, waiting on Prince to come save me. I left the ordinary world, and I entered an extraordinary world of the dark forest, of the mystery of the feminine, of the unknown spaces, the enchantress, right? Who knows what's going to occur in those woods, but I had to leave the ordinary in order to come into the extraordinary, right? So Allerly Rowe, she leaves, she goes into the woods, and she finds a tree. She finds a broken tree, and she sleeps in the trunk of the tree. She asks the Great Mother to hold her in the night. How beautiful is that? She climbs in this tree, and it's got a little rut for her to sleep in. And she's got on her 1,000 furs, so none of the animals bother her in the night because she, quite frankly, looks like an animal. She gets soot from the fireplace, and she covers herself in this soot all over her face, so you can't even see her skin. She's a black 1,000 furs animal in the mysterious enchanted forest, being held within the tree. In these unknown spaces of this mystery. What is going to happen next to her? Well, the next morning, there's a king that's in the forest with his huntsmen. It's the next kingdom over. And the huntsmen, with their hound dogs, they find this tree because the dogs smell Allerly Rowe within the tree. So she's been found in the trunk of the tree, and by the dogs and the guards and the huntsmen and this other king from a far off kingdom over yonder. And they capture her. They're like, what is this animal? What is this wild animal with 1,000 furs? And they realize it's a little girl, and they decide to put her in the kitchen. So she goes to this kingdom in a far off land, and she works in the kitchen. And every day she has soot on her face, and she's wearing 1,000 furs of her primal nature. And what that really represents, the soot on her face, you can almost think about it like taking off her beauty so she can work in the kitchen and find out who she really is. She sweeps and she mops and she cooks for the king, and she's not seen for a few years. And if I think about my own story, when I quit the job and I moved out of California and I came to Sedona, where I currently live, there's a few years in between where I was sitting with plant medicine and really just taking off the makeup. I stopped dyeing my hair. I stopped cutting my hair. I stopped going tanning. No more fake nails. No more fake eyelashes, fake tans, fake. Took it all off, taking off the fake. I want to feel in my ugly so that I can find my inner beauty, right? We're taking off the mask of the outside narrative in order to find who we truly are inside. And this is what Allerly Rowe did for years, was soot on her face, removed her outer beauty, worked in the kitchen until she really started to cultivate who she could possibly be outside of her father's narrative and her mother's curse. Her mother's curse. You know, and we'll talk about her mother a little bit too, and the curse of the feminine. And, you know, I was mad at my mom when I should have been mad for my mom, right? My mother was also under this narrative. Reconciliation with the feminine, reconciliation with the mother is kind of the last stage of the heroine's journey. And the only way to reconcile is to truly find compassion. For our mothers did the best they could with the tools that they had. And Allerly Rowe's mother thought through that curse of finding the most beautiful queen was going to keep the kingdom picture perfect, which there really is no such thing. It's picture perfect according to a narrative of what should be, which is not our own narrative, you know? And so not only is the masculine, or, you know, the helms of the masculine society keeping us in this narrative, but our mothers, right? 7 generations back are also under the helms of this masculine narrative. Allerly Rowe's mom thought she was blessing the kingdom with another beautiful queen, but what happened was that she inserted, she gifted, she passed down the generational trauma onto her daughter of this picture perfect reality that is not necessarily attainable. And she gave that narrative to her daughter, thinking that she was giving the kingdom a good thing. And it just and that's the incestuism of the narrative, right? It gets handed down from generation to generation. You know, there's a biblical saying, the sins of our fathers live 7 generations forward. So I'm not only living my trauma, my narrative, whatever's happened in this life, but my mothers. You go back 7 generations past, you don't even know what myth you're living. Whose myth is this? Whose story is this, you know? So it really takes putting on our soot, taking off the narrative, putting on our coat of 1,000 furs, which really represents our primal essence, in order to start to uncover who we truly are. So, you know, to close up Allerly Rowe, she works in the kitchen. She has her dresses kept safe in this acorn. She wears her coat of 1,000 furs, and every once in a while she gets brave. You know, the king of this palace that she was working in the kitchen, he has these grand balls, you know, every once in a while, where everybody puts on their beautiful gowns and their masks, and they show up to the ball and they dance with each other. And by such a blessing, maybe some maiden will be able to dance with the king, right? And so one night, Allerly Rowe says, I think I could go up to the ball tonight. Maybe I'll put on this beautiful sundress that my father made, and I'll go up to the ball and I'll take a break for the kitchen because I'm feeling brave enough. I'm going to venture up just for the night because I feel brave in my body. And she took off her soot and she put on her beautiful dress and she went up to the ball. And lo and behold, she was the young maiden that got to dance with the king on that night. And then she was only allowed to leave the kitchen for 30 minutes or so, and she took a little bit longer, and so she had to leave the king quickly to run back down to the kitchen to put back on her soot, put back on her furs, take off that beautiful dress, and again get back in tune with her primal nature before she got in trouble from the boss of the kitchen, you know, like the head cook, who ultimately he was the one that gave her permission to venture up just for that night. And so that happened. And a couple months passed, and she danced with the king, and it was all beautiful. And she came back down to her cave of her body, cave of the kitchen, mopping and sweeping and getting to know her ugliness, her primal nature once again. And lo and behold, a few months later, another ball happened. And so she went up to the ball, and this time she wore the feminine dress, the moon dress, right? So she met the king and her sun. She met the king and her sun energy, her masculine energy, her developed masculine, and ventured back down. And then she came up in her moon dress, in her feminine energy, and she again, the king recognized her and danced with her one more time, and the clock struck, right? A true Cinderella story, that the clock struck midnight or whatever it might be, and she realized she needed to leave, and she broke away from the king in this fairy tale experience, and went back down to the cave of the kitchen, the cave of her body, took off the beautiful dress, put her soot back on, and again got to know herself a little bit more, just a little bit more. And again, a couple months pass, and when she wore the, there was this thing that happened, that when she wore the moon dress, or maybe it's the star dress, but so she does it a third time, and this time she wears the star dress, okay? The unity dress, the universal dress, the oneness of the sun and the feminine combine into the universal expansiveness of her highest expression in the stars, right? Wearing this dress made of stars, and danced with the king again, but this time he gave her a ring. And this is ultimately how she got caught. She ran back down to the kitchen. She took off the beautiful star dress. I think she forgot to put her soot back on her face this time. And what's happening every time she ventures up and comes back down, and ventures up and comes back down, and ventures up and comes back down. How many of you have ventured up, found your power, and then went back into the cave of your body? Because what is that? A dark night of the soul, an initiation, a way that we come to find, a way that we come to know ourselves occurs once more, an initiatory stage of life. We get divorced, we lose the relationship, we quit the job, right? We have these we cross these thresholds of maturity in life, these initiations that often feel like death, because quite frankly, they are. Your mother wants your fullness. So in order for the mother, the universal oneness, the expansiveness of the true being of who you are, in order to step into your fullest expression, your smallness has to die. And we have to let go of those things that are keeping us small. And maybe it was the relationship, the job, maybe it was the geographical location, maybe it was the friend group, right? And we have got to let go of these things that we love so much, because we love ourselves more, and we're being called forth to step into more aligned power of our fullest expression, universal oneness, and whatever you want to call it. But anyways, so Allerly Rowe gets given a ring and forgets to put her soot back on, and the king comes after her this time, and he finds her in the kitchen, and he recognizes her, and he ends up marrying her. She becomes the queen of this more functional kingdom, right? This kingdom within herself that she created, her queendom. So she left the father's house, she left the patriarchal society, she left the program, the incestuism that just didn't feel good in her body. I don't know why, but this isn't right. This is all I know, but it's not right, right? This is all I know, but it's not serving me anymore. She had to leave that and go on her hero's journey, to embark on her heroine's journey, to find the unity of herself once again. So that's the story of Allerly Rowe. I love it so much. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found metaphor in it, right? Because there's metaphor all over the place in it. But one thing I want to talk about, another place to go, is I would love to talk about Allerly Rowe's mother a little bit more. And Allerly Rowe's mother really represents the death mother of the narrative that keeps us small. The death mother is the patriarchal mother right? The mother that does the bidding on behalf of the patriarchy. Where can we find this mother in myth? Well, it's the myth of Medusa, right? The myth of Medusa. When you look at Medusa, she turns you to stone. She concretizes metaphor in life. She sends you on a path of like the linear, the concretized. It eliminates the seasonal changes in your life, right? The myth of Medusa, when you look her in the eyes and she turns you to stone, you are denied access to the archetypal world at that point. And you have to take out your sword of truth and you have to shatter the stones of Medusa in order to invite metaphor in your life once again. You know, the death mother is really death on behalf of death. There is no life once we're concretized. But there's a stage up from the myth of Medusa, right? Which is the dark mother. And whereas in Medusa, it's death on behalf of death in this metaphor, and we must find our sword of truth in order to shatter the stones of Medusa, to find an archetypal world that lives in metaphor again. The dark mother is death on behalf of life. And this is actually where we start moving up our energetic system where, you know, I can speak from a true story in my life of suicidal ideations, right? My body was calling for the seasonal changes of life, but as I was frozen in the stones of Medusa, or frozen looking straight at the patriarchal, linear, lacking metaphor, suppression of the feminine life, I couldn't welcome my seasonal changes in metaphor. And I knew that there were pieces of me trying to die, but I thought I needed to die. Because without metaphor, thinking linearly, it's not that pieces of me need to die and be let go. It's not that I need to shatter the stones of Medusa in order to choose life, right? It's that I need to die, not that pieces of me need to die through metaphor. So in welcoming the myths, the form of metaphor back into our lives, we get to travel up the chakra system and meet our own dark mother through the deep dive, the descent to the goddess within, meet the dark mother and shift from death on behalf of death, of the death mother energy, into death on behalf of life in the dark mother energy. Deities that represent the dark mother energy, Kali. And this is the fun part of the deities of Eastern mythology. And this is the fun part of thinking in metaphor. There are stories and myth of the mother everywhere. I mean, it's just like this never-ending well of archetypal energies that we can dive into. And we think about Kali and we think about, the goddess of revolution, okay? Death on behalf of life. Death on behalf of what needs to die so that we can revolt and we can cause revolution in our own life. So she wears literally a garland of skulls around her neck because she is beheading the egos that are not serving humanity nor herself. So she is a destructive force. She's actually an electric force that penetrates outwards and beheads the egos of things that are not serving her, and she's summoning the flames of her solar plex in her hands in order to create change and destruction that ignites transformation, right? Kali is the goddess of time, and she is the goddess of change through that time. So that's a fun one to think about when we get into the Dark Mother. But I also want to talk a little bit about Persephone and Demeter, and I want to talk about Inanna. Coming into Inanna, she is really the tale of the maiden that leads the hero's journey, that goes on the descent within, the heroine's journey, and that comes back forever changed, right? So they tell Inanna when she goes on this journey, don't go on this journey, you'll never come back. And it was so true, because once we go on this journey, we don't come back. We don't come back as the same self that we were when we left. A different form of our own evolution comes forward. So Inanna can be thought about as Isis, Ishtar, that goddess of fertility, the birther of the golden age. And We claim our inheritance of sacred sexuality and sovereignty through the story of Inanna. And we think of Inanna, she was in the Egyptian age. She was a Sumerian goddess, actually. Inanna was a Sumerian goddess, and she had her queendom. And she was the ruler of the land. And she had the jewels and the garb and the robes. And she had the people. And, she had her whole queendom. She had everything. But Inanna knew that something was missing. Inanna knew that this wasn't it. Inanna knew that all the glitz and the glam and the riches were not it. She was not happy, right? And she knew that she needed to go on a journey. And she needed to leave the kingdom to go on this journey. And the knightsmen and the people, they warned her, don't go on the journey, you won't come back. But she needed to go on this journey to find herself. And the journey that she went on was leaving the queendom to go find her sister Ereshkigal in the underworld. Her sister Ereshkigal was the queen of the underworld. And she needed to go find her. She needed to. And so Inanna decides to leave her queendom and go on this journey. And she has to, and this is beautiful because we talk about it in metaphor, she has to enter the underworld, and there's 7 layers deep of the underworld before she gets to Ereshkigal. And what could potentially those 7 layers represent within our own energetic body? The 7 chakras systems, right? We have 7 chakras. We also have 7 lokas above and 7 lokas below. This number 7 is just beautiful in metaphor, cross-culturally in many mythologies, to represent, in my opinion, the subtle body system, the descent within. So Inanna starts her descent to the underworld. She goes through this cave, and there's 7 layers, and in each layer she has to take off another one of her jewelry, a piece of clothing. She must arrive to the underworld naked and vulnerable. And you know what her sister does when she arrives to the underworld naked and vulnerable? She hangs her on a hook, representing the pangs of death, for 3 days. And the only reason that Inanna comes back to life is through the grief of her sister Ereshkigal. What happens when the maiden goes into her own underworld? To come out unchanged, she must fully grieve herself. She must fully grieve the aspects of her that need to die. And then she must fully reclaim the aspects of her that need to be reclaimed. And as Inanna comes out of the underworld, through each of the 7 layers, she's able to put on another piece of clothing so she doesn't come back naked and afraid. She comes back fully in her power, rerooted in her life force energy. You see this in the myth of Persephone too, right? I talked about it earlier. 2 versions of Persephone. Oh my gosh, right? Pre-patriarchy, post-patriarchy, right? As the rise of institutionalized religion, as the rise of the God in the sky, and the suppression of the feminine, where the feminine was, before the rise of institutionalized religion, God was goddess, and goddess was woman, and woman was earth, and it was all one circular representation of the holy, of the sacred, was goddess, embodied, connected to the seasonal changes of the earth, right? Woman was goddess, goddess was earth, and earth was religion. And as the rise of institutionalized religion came and the God in the sky started suppressing the feminine, earth was no longer religion. Okay, so Persephone, pre-patriarchal version. Persephone knew that she, like Inanna, needed to go on this mission. And it's such a mission of empowerment, right? I mean, can you feel the power between, on my own accord, I went to the cave, I did the deep dive within to regain my power, collect parts of me that maybe were castrated out from societal programming, trauma, narratives that occurred, patterning, stories, small self, right? There comes an age when we have to recollect ourselves, and it's a progressive stage of maturity. So let's welcome it in. And through the myths of empowerment, right? The story of Inanna, or the myth of Persephone, pre-patriarchy. She went on her own accord on down to the underworld. And then post-patriarchy, Zeus, her father, summoned her to Hades and left her mother Demeter dying, dying, searching for her maiden, searching for her daughter. So let's talk about Demeter, right? Because Persephone, this is the most beautiful story of a mother, a maiden and a mother. What happens to the maiden when she goes to the underworld to grieve? Well, the mother grieves. The mother grieves the age which she can no longer go back to. And if a mother doesn't properly grieve her inner maiden, she becomes resentful to the maidens or the representation of youth outside of herself. And this is why we have so many dysfunctional mother-daughter relationships where the mothers did not properly grieve their inner maidens, and therefore their daughters catch the wrath of that. You know, I can speak for my own self. You know, my daughter's 20, and if I wasn't aware of these stories, if I didn't have awareness around this, fully grieving my maiden, you know, I could see how, as my daughter got older in her youth, in her maidenhood, and I got older, headed towards crone, headed towards elder, and couldn't go back to my youth, I could resent my daughter for her youth because I didn't properly grieve my own, you know? And then that's where we have all kinds of interweavings of codependency, toxicity within the mother-daughter relationship. So for me, the myth of Demeter really represents a maiden that is lost to her own underworld. And as the maiden is lost to the underworld, Demeter grieves. She actually builds a temple. She builds a temple so she can properly grieve her maiden, and nothing in the land grows while she's grieving her maiden. Nothing in the land grows while she's grieving her maiden. No seasonal changes in life, right? This is death. This is winter, right? This isn't where things blossom and grow. This is actually where everything's on hold until we properly grieve. You look at it like the freezing of your psyche. Our progressive stages of maturity are on hold, are stalled until the proper grieving of our maiden. Kind of like the thawing of our psyches. Like if you thought of your psyche like a block of ice, like winter, what happens if you take that block of ice and you crack it? Like that's not natural, right? But the melting of the ice through the seasonal changes, through the spring, through the summer, where we can now actually melt off through our progressive stages of maturity and allow our natural cycles to blossom and grow, okay? We can't force the bloom before spring, okay? We can't thaw the ice before summer. We just get to grieve. We just get to sit in the thing, presence to it. You know, what happens is we bypass and it's uncomfortable and we don't want to go there, when really what we need to do is close the loop by building a temple and honoring all aspects of ourselves. So Demeter builds a temple and she fully grieves. And then she ends up telling her masculine, right? You think about the masculine that sanctioned my feminine to the underworld. I mean, that was my whole hero's journey. That was the whole suppression of my feminine, when my tyrannical masculine was suppressing my feminine, right? And so Demeter goes to Zeus and she says, you know, you're going to have to let the maiden go. Like, I need some seasonal changes here. The fertility of the land needs to blossom and bloom, or spring is never going to happen. And so the tyrannical masculine that sanctioned the feminine to the underworld kind of needs a little talking to, right? Have you ever needed to talk to your own inner tyrannical masculine and say, hey, I'm going to need you to let my feminine breathe so that I can spring and grow and bring fertility back to my land, right? And so that's how we have the seasonal changes through the myth of Persephone, is that Zeus, again, makes a deal with Hades. And then Hades, in his manipulation and his trickery, and we can talk about that at a different time, says, okay, I'll do that. And on the way out, he has Persephone take a bite of the pomegranate, which is the fruit of the underworld. And she bites the pomegranate, and that now binds her 6 months in the underworld and 6 months in the upper world. And that's how we have the seasonal changes. Persephone, it's said that she, even while in the underworld, fell in love with Hades. She fell in love with the dark pieces of her beingness. She fell in love with the winter, right? With the darkness, with the void, with the heat and the fire and the burning of the underworld. She fell in love with it. And so she ate the fruit, and she maybe even chose to spend 6 months down there and 6 months up here. And what if we take our power back and we choose to spend half of our lives grieving, dying, seasonally changing through death in order to spring forward in life a little bit further into our own consciousness, into our own maturity, into our own developmental stages, into our own spring and summer, right? Can we choose to honor the grieving process and honor our own underworld as just a progressive stage in life? Because dark mother energy, we will die in order to choose life on the other end. And so that's the story of Inanna. That's the story of Persephone. That's the story of Allerley Rowe. And I could go on for so many stories. But I think I'm gonna stop right there. And I would love to hear whatever you have to say about these stories. What resonated for you? It's so fun to talk about these myths in metaphor. And it's so fun to bring storytelling back to a coven of women where we get to see each other as divine mirrors. What was your underworld like? What was your underworld? Oh, you were in that one stage in life and it was dark and you made it through. Thank you for sharing. I'm in my underworld right now and it doesn't feel like I can't see the light on the other side yet. I don't feel the life yet and it's difficult. Will it ever end? Yes, the good news is that it will end. And we can sit in sisterhood and share stories like these. And even with end, the nature of the feminine is cyclic. 24 hours in the day, it's the 30 days in a month, it's the 365 days in a year. This is the feminine cyclic nature. And so when I say, is it ever going to end? It's like, it'll end and we'll come up for air and then it'll begin again. And we get to do it over and over and over. And hopefully on a path of ascension where every time we spiral around our myths once again, we elevate our experience. There's no end. We just hope to elevate the experience. So thank you for joining me today. I look forward to your feedback and drop your comments below. Send me a DM. Let's continue the discussion. Mwah.